Alright, let's talk about WorldCom. Picture this. It's the 1990s. The internet is this new, exciting thing. Everyone's getting a dial-up modem that makes that delightful screeching sound. And telecommunications, or telecom, is the hottest ticket in town. This is the world that gave birth to WorldCom. It started out in a coffee shop in Mississippi. Yes, a coffee shop. It was originally called LDDS, which sounds less like a company and more like a typo. But under its CEO, a folksy, cowboy boot-wearing guy named Bernie Ebbers, it started growing. And when I say growing, I mean it grew like a weed that had just mainlined a case of Red Bull. WorldCom didn't grow by inventing some amazing new technology or providing the best customer service you've ever had. No, its strategy was simpler. It just bought everything. And I mean everything. It was like a corporate Pac-Man, gobbling up smaller telecom companies left and right. In the 1990s, WorldCom went on a shopping spree that would make a Kardashian blush, acquiring over 60 different companies. This aggressive strategy made Wall Street investors absolutely giddy. They saw a company that was getting bigger and bigger, and in the dot-com bubble, bigger was always better. No one seemed to be asking if this relentless expansion was actually sustainable. They just saw the stock price go up and up and up. The absolute peak of this madness came in 1998, when WorldCom bought MCI Communications for a staggering $37 billion. At the time, this was the largest merger in corporate history. It was a massive deal that turned WorldCom from a fast-growing upstart into an undisputed giant of the industry, second only to AT&T. Bernie Ebbers was hailed as a genius, a telecom king. The company was on top of the world, a shining example of the new economy. Its stock was a must-have, and its future seemed limitless. It was a classic American success story, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. But here's the thing about things that grow that fast. They are often incredibly fragile. WorldCom's entire identity was built on constant, breakneck growth. Its stock price depended on it. Its reputation depended on it. The whole house of cards was propped up by the promise that tomorrow would always be bigger and more profitable than today. But what happens when that growth suddenly stops? What happens when the music of the dot-com boom starts to fade? Well, as we were all about to find out, that's when the creative and deeply illegal accounting begins. The foundation of this telecom darling wasn't solid rock. It was just a pile of sand waiting for the tide to come in. So, while Wall Street was throwing a party for WorldCom, inside the company, not everyone was popping champagne. Some people were starting to notice things that just didn't add up. One of those people was a man named Kim Emi. Kim worked in the division that handled the company's network infrastructure in Washington, D.C. He was a nuts and bolts kind of guy, someone who understood the actual physical business of connecting phone calls and data. He wasn't an accountant, but he knew what his division's budget and performance should look like. And what he was seeing on the company's official reports made him scratch his head. In 1998, right after the massive MCI merger, Kim Emi started to see some truly bizarre things happening with the numbers. His division was doing well, but the financial reports coming from corporate headquarters seemed to be playing a game of fantasy football with the budget. Projects he knew were struggling were suddenly being reported as profitable. Expenses that should have been there had seemingly vanished into thin air. He tried to raise the alarm, pointing out these discrepancies to his superiors. He essentially said, "Hey, the numbers you guys are publishing don't match the reality of what's happening on the ground." You can probably guess how that went. When Kim Emi tried to flag these issues, he was met with a wall of silence and, eventually, pushback. His bosses told him, more or less, to mind his own business and not to question the numbers from corporate. He was moved to a different position, a clear signal that rocking the boat was not welcome. This was the first major red flag, a warning sign from inside the machine that something was deeply wrong. But the people at the top were not interested in hearing about problems. They were only interested in reporting endless success, even if they had to invent it. This early resistance is crucial to the story. It shows that the fraud wasn't some oopsie-daisy accounting error. It was a deliberate effort to silence anyone who questioned the official narrative. Kim Emi's experience was a preview of the corporate culture at WorldCom. Loyalty was prized above integrity, and anyone who dared to point out that the emperor had no clothes was quickly shown the door. The company was actively choosing to ignore reality. This wasn't just a crack in the foundation. It was a sign that the entire structure was being propped up by lies, and the people in charge were willing to do whatever it took to keep it from falling. To really understand the WorldCom disaster, you need to see how quickly it all unraveled. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car was a multi-billion-dollar corporation and it was driving straight into a wall it had built itself. Let's lay it out. In the late 1990s, things were great. The 1998 MCI merger made WorldCom a global behemoth. The stock was flying high. Bernie Ebbers was on the cover of magazines. Everything seemed perfect, but beneath the surface, the pressure was mounting to keep those amazing results coming, no matter what. The trouble really began in 2000. The dot-com bubble, which had fueled so much of the telecom industry's growth, finally burst. Suddenly, the demand that everyone had bet on just wasn't there. WorldCom's revenue started to flatten, and then it started to drop. For a company whose entire value was based on non-stop growth, this was a catastrophe. Instead of admitting this to investors, WorldCom's top executives, led by CFO Scott Sullivan, started cooking the books. They began hiding expenses and inflating revenues to make it look like the company was still hitting its targets. This was the start of the fraud in earnest. The whole thing came crashing down in 2002. In March of that year, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is supposed to be the financial police, started asking questions about WorldCom's accounting practices. This put the company under a microscope. At the same time, an internal auditor named Cynthia Cooper was starting her own secret investigation, working late at night to uncover the truth. By June 2002, she had found it. She presented her findings to the board. The company had improperly accounted for billions of dollars. The game was up. On June 25, 2002, WorldCom admitted to the public that it had inflated its assets by over $3.8 billion. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The company's stock, which had once traded at over $60 a share, became worthless overnight. Just a month later, on July 21, 2002, WorldCom filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It was, at the time, the largest bankruptcy in United States history, even bigger than Enron's, which had collapsed just a few months earlier. In less than 2 years, WorldCom went from a celebrated icon of American capitalism to a poster child for corporate crime. It was a stunningly fast and spectacular collapse, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. So, how did they do it? How did WorldCom hide billions of dollars in losses and convince everyone it was thriving? It wasn't some impossibly complex financial wizardry. It was actually a shockingly simple, almost childish accounting trick. Think of it this way. Every business has two main types of costs. There are operating expenses, which are the day-to-day costs of running the business, like paying for electricity, salaries, or leasing phone lines from other companies. These costs get subtracted from your revenue right away, which lowers your reported profit for that quarter. The other type of cost is a capital expenditure. These are investments in things that will provide value for a long time, like buying a building, a fleet of trucks, or, in WorldCom's case, laying down fiber optic cables. You don't subtract the full cost of these items from your profits immediately. Instead, you spread the cost out over many years. This is perfectly legal and makes sense. If you buy a building that will last 40 years, you shouldn't have to pretend its entire cost hit your profits in a single year. This distinction is key to the whole scam. Here's the trick WorldCom pulled. They took their massive operating expenses, specifically the fees they had to pay to other telecom companies to use their networks, and they just pretended they were capital expenditures. They literally moved billions of dollars from one column on the accounting spreadsheet to the other. By reclassifying these everyday costs as long-term investments, they magically made them disappear from the current quarter's expense report. This instantly boosted their reported profits. It's like if you spent your entire paycheck on groceries and rent, but on your budget spreadsheet, you called it investing in a future mansion, so it looked like you still had all your money. This simple lie had a monumental effect. From 2001 to 2002, WorldCom did this with billions of dollars. This accounting fraud was the only thing keeping the company's profits from looking like a complete disaster. They weren't making money, they were just hiding their losses. The genius of the fraud, if you can call it that, was its simplicity. It wasn't hidden in some obscure financial instrument. It was a blatant misclassification, an entry in a ledger that was fundamentally a lie. The whole thing was propped up by a journal entry that said, "This expense is now an asset." It was a house of cards built on the most basic accounting deception imaginable. In every story of corporate villainy, you hope for a hero. In the WorldCom saga, that hero was Cynthia Cooper. She wasn't a high-flying executive or a Wall Street analyst. She was the vice president of internal audit at WorldCom. Her job was basically to be the company's own internal detective, checking the books to make sure everything was, legitimate. And in early 2002, she and her team started to notice something smelled very, very fishy. A manager in another department came to her with a concern about a strange accounting entry, and like a dog with a bone, she just refused to let it go. Cooper and her team began their investigation, but they quickly ran into resistance. Top executives, including CFO Scott Sullivan, told them to back off. They were told they were wasting their time and that they should work on other projects. The company's main accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, yes, the same firm from the Enron scandal, also assured them that everything was fine. But Cooper's gut told her otherwise. The numbers just didn't make sense. So, she and her small team decided to continue their audit in secret, often working late at night in their office in Clinton, Mississippi, just to avoid suspicion. They started digging deep into the company's computerized accounting system, following the money trail. They were looking for the billions of dollars in capital expenditures that seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. After weeks of painstaking work, poring over data, and tracking down journal entries, they finally found the smoking gun. They discovered the fraudulent entries where billions in operating costs had been disguised as capital investments. The evidence was undeniable. They had uncovered a fraud of staggering proportions, cooked up at the highest levels of their own company. It was the oh my god moment when they realized the true scale of the deception. Armed with irrefutable proof, Cynthia Cooper had to make a choice. She could stay silent, or she could risk her career and expose the truth. She chose the truth. In June 2002, she went to the chairman of WorldCom's audit committee and laid out her findings. It was a moment of incredible courage. She was an employee blowing the whistle on her own bosses, knowing it would bring the entire company crashing down. Her bravery and integrity are the reason the fraud was exposed when it was. Without her and her team's relentless pursuit of the truth, the lies might have continued for much longer, making the eventual collapse even more catastrophic. When WorldCom finally admitted to the fraud on June 25, 2002, the shockwave was felt everywhere. The most immediate victims were the company's employees, over 80,000 of them around the world. In the blink of an eye, the successful telecom giant they worked for was revealed to be a sham. Within weeks, the company filed for bankruptcy and the layoffs began. More than 20,000 people lost their jobs. These weren't the executives who cooked the books. These were ordinary people, technicians, salespeople, administrative assistants, who had done nothing wrong but suddenly found themselves unemployed. Then, there were the shareholders. Millions of people, from big-time institutional investors to regular folks who had put their retirement savings into WorldCom stock, were wiped out. Many had invested in WorldCom because it was seen as a blue-chip stock, a safe and reliable part of the booming tech economy. Their 401ks and pension plans were heavily invested in the company. When the stock price plummeted from over $60 to mere pennies, an estimated $180 billion in shareholder value evaporated. That's not just a number on a screen. That's retirement dreams, college funds, and life savings, all gone because a few executives decided to lie. The damage didn't stop there. The WorldCom scandal, coming so soon after the collapse of Enron, sent a tsunami of distrust through the entire stock market and the telecom industry. If a company as big and seemingly successful as WorldCom could be a complete fraud, who else could be lying? Investors became incredibly skeptical, and public confidence in corporate America hit rock bottom. Other telecom companies, even the honest ones, suffered as investment dried up and the industry was viewed with suspicion. It was a massive black eye for the entire sector, setting it back for years. The ripple effects were enormous. Suppliers who sold equipment and services to WorldCom were left with billions in unpaid bills. Communities that had relied on WorldCom facilities for jobs and tax revenue were devastated. The scandal demonstrated in the most brutal way possible that corporate fraud isn't a victimless crime. It's an economic bomb that destroys jobs, savings, and trust. The choices made by a handful of people in a boardroom in Mississippi had a direct, painful, and lasting impact on hundreds of thousands of lives across the globe. The kaboom was big, and almost everyone got hit by the shrapnel. After the mushroom cloud of the bankruptcy cleared, the question on everyone's mind was, who is going to pay for this? The public was furious, and prosecutors were determined to hold someone accountable. The ensuing legal battle became a masterclass in finger-pointing. Several key executives were arrested and charged, but the main event was the trial of the CEO, the face of the company, Bernie Ebbers. His defense strategy was bold, to say the least. He claimed he had no idea what was going on. He argued he was a former basketball coach, not an accountant, and that he simply trusted his financial team to handle the numbers. This "I'm just a simple country CEO" defense was put to the test when his own CFO, Scott Sullivan, took the stand. Sullivan, who had already pleaded guilty and was cooperating with the prosecution to get a lighter sentence, became the star witness against his old boss. He testified that Ebbers was not only aware of the financial problems, but was the driving force behind the fraud. Sullivan claimed that Ebbers repeatedly told him they had to hit our numbers, creating immense pressure to cook the books. It became a classic case of he said, with the jury having to decide who was more believable, the folksy CEO or the disgraced CFO trying to save his own skin. In the end, the jury didn't buy Ebbers' story. They found it impossible to believe that the CEO of a company that massive could be completely oblivious to an $11 billion accounting fraud happening right under his nose. In March 2005, Bernard Ebbers was found guilty on all 9 counts, including conspiracy and securities fraud. It was a landmark verdict. A few months later, he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, a stunningly long sentence for a white-collar crime, which sent a clear message to corporate executives everywhere that they would be held responsible for their company's actions. Other executives also faced consequences. Scott Sullivan, for his cooperation, received a sentence of 5 years. Several other lower-level accountants who went along with the scheme also received prison time, though their sentences were much shorter. The trials revealed a toxic corporate culture where questioning authority was career suicide and loyalty to the boss trumped any sense of ethics or legality. The long prison sentence for Ebbers was a powerful, if belated statement that the excuse "I didn't know" is not a get-out-of-jail-free card, especially when you're the one in charge of the whole circus. The spectacular implosions of Enron and then WorldCom in such a short span of time created a crisis of confidence in American business. It was clear that the existing rules were not enough to stop massive corporate fraud. The public and politicians were demanding action. Congress responded with surprising speed and bipartisan unity, passing a piece of legislation that would dramatically change the landscape of corporate governance. This new law was called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, often shortened to just SOX. You can think of it as the "we're super serious this time, don't lie about your numbers" Act. SOX introduced a whole host of new, stricter rules aimed at preventing another WorldCom from happening. One of its most important provisions was Section 302, which requires that a company's CEO and CFO personally certify the accuracy of their financial statements. This was a direct response to Bernie Ebbers' "I didn't know" defense. Now, top executives can't just claim ignorance. They have to sign their names on the dotted line, and if the reports turn out to be fraudulent, they can be held criminally liable. It essentially says, if you sign it, you own it. The act also created the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or PCAOB, a new watchdog to oversee the auditors of public companies. Before SOX, the accounting industry was largely self-regulated, which, as the Arthur Andersen Enron WorldCom trifecta proved, wasn't working out so well. The PCAOB was designed to make sure that accounting firms were doing their jobs properly and weren't getting too cozy with the companies they were supposed to be auditing. It also placed stricter rules on internal controls, forcing companies to have robust processes in place to ensure their financial reporting is accurate and to document and test those processes. Sarbanes-Oxley was the most significant piece of corporate reform legislation since the 1930s. While some business leaders complained about the high costs and administrative burden of complying with the new rules, its impact has been profound. It forced a new level of accountability into boardrooms across America. It strengthened the role of internal auditors like Cynthia Cooper and provided more protections for whistleblowers. While no law can completely eliminate crime, SOX made the kind of blatant, simple fraud that brought down WorldCom much, much harder to get away with. It was a direct, powerful, and necessary response to a scandal that shook the financial world to its core. So, what's the final lesson here? Why are we still talking about a defunct telecom company more than 2 decades later? The story of WorldCom is more than just a business case study. It's a fundamental morality play about honesty and deception. It's a stark reminder that companies are not just abstract entities that exist on a stock ticker. They are made up of people making choices, and the leaders of WorldCom consistently chose the easy lie over the hard truth. They chose to cook the books, rather than admit they were failing to meet Wall Street's impossible expectations. The scandal serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of a corporate culture that prioritizes growth at all costs. Bernie Ebbers and his team were so obsessed with keeping the stock price high and maintaining their image as winners that they lost touch with reality. They created an environment where bad news was buried and employees who asked tough questions were punished. This story underscores the critical importance of strong business ethics and a culture where integrity is valued above all else. It proves that character is just as important as capital, if not more so. Ultimately, the downfall of WorldCom wasn't caused by complex market forces or some confusing business strategy. It was brought down by simple, deliberate lies. The fraud wasn't sophisticated, it was brazen. They just changed the labels on their expenses. This simplicity is what makes the story so chilling and so important. It shows that catastrophic failure doesn't always require a criminal mastermind. All it takes is a few people in power deciding to cheat, and a lot of other people being too afraid or too willing to go along with it. The ghost of WorldCom still haunts the financial world today. It lives on in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and in the compliance departments of every major corporation. It serves as a permanent reminder to boards, executives, and auditors of what happens when accountability fails. It's a lesson written in the red ink of an $11 billion fraud and paid for with the jobs and savings of thousands of innocent people. The lesson is simple. You can try to build an empire on lies, but lies are not a foundation. They are a time bomb, and eventually they will always explode.